into this, I would like to introduce our Managing Director, Mr. Abhinandan De. Sir, just to give you an idea, Mr. Abhinandan De is actually, he spearheads a lot of our efforts. So he is the one who thinks of all these things. So he will be actually conducting this discussion with you, and I will. I think Mr. De is there. He was just.
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mr. Day is here. I can see him. Yes.
he's Mr. Abhinandan De. So I will not take much time. I will leave it to both of you. Then let's see how it takes up from here. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Once again, I'll keep on intervening whenever it will be required. Sir, if you can please take off.
Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Yes, I'll take over from now. So, a warm welcome, Mr. Nagarajan, to you from all of us here at IIES.
Thank you, sir.
So, not very often do we have someone of your stature come and speak to our students. So, I believe that today's day is going to be an absolutely enlightening day for our students. So, you're a senior HR professional, and more importantly, I think you are, as Sudeep mentioned, you are a thought leader in this particular sector. And to have someone of your experience, your global background, to have share some tidbits with our students, I think that will be a huge takeaway for them. And I'm sure students, please be all ears for this conversation. And also, I will request all of you, if you have any questions in mind. Very rarely do you get the opportunity to interact with someone like Mr. Nagarajan. So please make use of this opportunity, and please put forward your questions, whether these are questions about life, because as a coach, I'm sure Mr. Nagarajan is handling that on a day-to-day basis for a lot of senior professionals. So as students as well, don't feel shy to ask questions on your life, on your career, and if you have specific questions regarding the domain that he is from, HR, please feel free to ask questions. With that, I would like to start today's session. And Mr. Nagarajan, could you just introduce the topic that you will speak about today, which talks about character, and how do you define character?
Yes. Thank you, Abhinandanji, for those warm words of introduction. Also, Sudeep, for having set up this call. I think it's a pleasure to be talking to all of you. It's been about 36 years that I've been working. I completed from XLRA Jamshedpur in 1988, and I've by and large been in the HR profession for all these 36 years, barring 4 years in between when I was a consultant with a company that was then called AF Ferguson and Company, and which is now part of the Ernst & Young network. And during that time, I keep making it a point to say that I never did HR for Ferguson's. I did HR for Ferguson's clients. It was a business role, and I think it was one of the more I was glad that it came early in my career. But maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let me just start from the basics again. And since this is an online meeting, it's does not have the same dynamics as a face-to-face or even a one-to-many kind of group. But character means different things to different people. Yeah, it is. It's not. I mean, all of us have an intuitive understanding. Yashraj, I think you need to go on mute. Right. Character means different things to different people, and all of us intuitively know a person of good character when we meet one, and we know a person of bad character when we hear of one. Fortunately, I think it's not common to meet people of bad character, but very often what happens is that we confuse character with morality. And maybe confuse is the wrong word. It may also be legitimate in certain circumstances to think of someone who's of high morality as someone of high character. In an organizational context, however, morality has something to do with it, but not all of it. And therefore, I would focus much more. This discussion, I'm going to be focusing much more on what separates really legendary thought leaders from managers, if you like, or leaders from managers, and what really builds your reputation as a leader. What really is it that you stand apart from the rest of the crowd for as you enter different stages in your career, what is it that you'll be remembered for? And I'll talk about myself a little bit on the way, and I will also talk about the journey a little bit on the way. Hopefully, you'll get some insights at the end of it. Of course, as Abhinandan ji pointed out, I'm very happy to take questions either during the discussion or at the end of it. The way I plan it, I should not be speaking for more than 20, 25 minutes at the most. And then we should be having a Q&A or any other points that you'd like to talk about. Mr. Day, I hope that's okay as a format. That should be all right. No?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that sounds perfect. I think we'll take questions at the end because I mean that ensures that the flow of the conversations remains.
Sure, sure. Let me first start by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm 58 years old now, a little beyond 58. My dad worked in the railways. He was posted all across India. He was responsible for the electrification of Indian railways. So if you recall, he worked about 36 years in the railways, and his job was very predictable. He would spend 2 years in one place, convert from steam and diesel to electric, and then because the electrification was complete, he would go to the next location. Just to give you, and therefore, although I'm a South Indian by ethnicity, I've never really been in the South. I was born in UP, and my early education was in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, interior Andhra. My father was fond of saying that he worked in Kharagpur before there was an IIT there. And he's also worked in a place called Chakradharpur. And he was also very fond of saying that he worked in a place called Adhra. Not the place that has the Taj Mahal, but a place called Adhra, which I also had the good fortune to visit at some point in time later in my career. We were not by any standards what you would call a badly off family. We were well off. No doubts about that. I think by those standards we would have been called middle class, but yet life presented some unusual challenges for us and made sure that we needed to, as kids, we needed to work our way through whatever it was. I don't think a lot of you might remember, we might even know what life was like in India until the 90s, but when I started my career, for instance, I was working in Panjim in Goa. All of Panjim had one PCO, one public call office, and my parents were in Chennai. And once a week, every Sunday, we had to walk to the PCO, which was about 3 kilometers away, and make a call to my parents for 3 minutes. That was if the line would connect. Sometimes it would not, which meant that you would speak to your parents next week, not in the same week. And in a world where mobile phones and internet connectivity abounds, this seems like a story from a different world altogether.
So far-fetched imagination for the kids today.
But it's not so far back. Frankly, it's 1990, but it is far back. It's 1990. Why am I saying this now? I think it's just to give you a sense that we grew up in a very resource-starved environment, a very resource-constrained kind of environment, and you could argue that it was artificially constrained. These were decisions made by policymakers and the government in terms of how the country should grow. And quite famously, one prime minister of that time said that we don't need more factories producing Vicks Vaporub. We need more factories producing whatever the honorable prime minister thought was a priority for the country at that point in time. This was even before I was an adult. So I'm saying we're going back at least 5 or 6 decades now. But that said, let's go back to what builds a reputation in the corporate world. This is part of the building blocks of it. But the very first thing and that I would like to emphasize and I'd like to talk about is get great at your academics. Get great at your studies. A lot of people kind of undervalue the academic process. I think don't make that mistake. To all those of you who are students here, at the end of the day, if you don't know what you are supposed to know, no one's going to respect you. If an accountant cannot interpret a balance sheet with me, I'm not going to listen to him. I'm not going to talk to him. If an HR manager can't tell me what the code of discipline says about a worker who has a grievance, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to listen to you. If a sales and marketing guy does not know how to use market research, sorry, you have a problem. And that's the starting point. The next level is integrating. The ability to be able to speak from cross-functional disciplines. Let me give you an example. and never used to be very good at maths, never used to be very good at statistics, right through my schooling years and with my BCom. Somewhere in my MBA, I got a professor who was clearly very passionate about the subject, but also had took the time to explain it to a lot of people who didn't understand it, and somewhere awakened an interest in me in understanding statistics, basic stats and number patterns and numbers. To the extent that after I completed my MBA, I continued studying statistics. And initially, it was a hobby, because when I started my career in HR, most HR people used to do training and performance appraisal, goal setting most of the while. You never had an opportunity to use statistics. But after liberalization in the 90s, it suddenly became very important to be for HR people to be able to talk numbers. And therefore, you start talking about concepts like mean, median, mode, normal distributions, Poisson's distribution, T distributions in manpower, and spikes in consumption. And to make sense of all that, you need to understand statistics. And guess who was at a slight advantage? So you need to. So don't stop with the syllabus. Don't stop with this is what is expected of me. Go that 5% more. XLRA does not have a paper library anymore. Most of it has gone online, as I'm sure it has in most institutes across the world. But as long as they had a paper library of some size, and which means until about 2000 AD, so about 12 years after I graduated, 14 years after I completed from XLRA, I went back once for campus placement, and I met a librarian, Mr. Hanan, and I said, how are you, Mr. Hanan? And after the pleasantries, he looks at me and he says, you are still the student with the maximum number of signatures on the books here. I'm like, okay. I used to read 2 books a week. I still read 2 books a week, by the way. It's just that the nature of the books has changed. Read a lot. Need not be paper books, read online. That's all right. But unless you read, unless you understand what's happening in the world around you and make sense of what seems to be discrete and disparate events, doesn't help. So what I'm really talking about is knowledge. Build knowledge as you grow on, and you'll find that it's a continuous process. It goes on. It's not really linked to your working life. It's actually much more than work, much more than profession and career. But the second thing that distinguishes, I think, great managers and great leaders from ordinary managers, for want of a better word, is what I call credibility. It's very simple. Do what you say what you do. And it's not as simple as it sounds. Yeah. When you get down to practicing it, you realize it is very, very tough. It works both ways. So one, you have to be very careful about what you promise, because if you promise, you have to deliver on it. There is simply no way you can say that I made a mistake, or I wasn't sure, or I didn't understand. Too bad. You said that you're going to do it. Do it. As long as it's not unethical, as long as it's not immoral, as long as you're not being asked to do something that breaks the law, but within the constraints of what your abilities are, within the constraints of what commitments you have made, has to be done. My uncle was the first Indian deputy managing director of a company that used to be called Courts Vayala or Madura Courts. It is now a division of Aditya Birla. And he was my role model early on, because we didn't have anyone else in the corporate world in my family. And I asked him, what does it take to succeed once? I sat down with him and chatted with him for half an hour. So this first and single advice was say what you mean and mean what you say. Do it. Don't waste, don't make excuses. And conversely, if you find that you are not going to be able to do something, tell me well ahead of time. Communicate early on. Very often people are afraid to say, this is not, I told you that I would do this by Monday morning, but we are now on Thursday afternoon and it looks like it's going to take until Tuesday morning. Well, if you know it today, then please talk about it today. Because the biggest problem I've had has been with people who don't keep commitments and tell me at the last minute. And I'm like, what can I do now? The fact is that a lot of things depend on your completing something by Monday morning. So if you're going to be late, something else is going to be late. So at least if you tell me, I can either help you achieve the Monday morning deadline, or I can rearrange someone else's work. But if you don't tell me anything, then all you come across is looking like an inefficient, ineffective person. And in my mind, it goes like, oh, can't rely on this person. He or she says things that they don't mean. They say or do things that they don't do. And this is how reputations are built in the corporate world. It's very simply this. When you say something, do you keep your word? If you keep your word, well and good. If you don't keep your word, your boss will be careful next time with you. And it gives rise to a whole lot of unhealthy behavior, if you ask me. So people start putting buffers, they start negotiating. If I want you to do something by Monday morning, I'll tell you I want it by Sunday morning. Neither good for you nor good for me. That kind of straightforward, open transparency is what makes a huge difference in terms of creating effective teams and doing effective things. But is that all? Is that all that there is? You have great knowledge, you have great execution skills. Will that be enough to see you going ahead? There's a third ingredient I'd like to talk about for some time, and this is probably another one of those ingredients that's very, very difficult to develop. It's called courage, and it is a quality that I see rarely in people who are entering the workforce, and because it is so rare, I value it a lot. Courage is the ability to tell your boss that he or she might be wrong. Not sure, but there might be a problem. Or put differently, it is to say that this plan may not work and these are the reasons why it will not work. Sure. Very often all of us, and this is culturally speaking, I'm going to be a little blunt and assertive now. This is something unique to our country. We tend to think of people in authority as people who are always right. Yeah? Because Sameer is a global HR officer, he must know what he's talking about. He must be correct. Or because such and such is a political leader, they must be right. Such and such is the chairman of the board, he or she must be right. And where this inhibits us is very often in terms of giving contrary feedback or giving any feedback at all. We tend to agree, we tend to give positive feedback. The point is that people in senior leadership positions need feedback as much as anyone else does. So we create a plan, we know that we think a plan will work. You might have a different perspective on it. You might be wrong, you might be right. That doesn't matter. But do you have the courage to speak up and say, I have a point of view on this proposal. I'd like to share it with you. I'd like to learn. I might be wrong, but I think these are some of the problems I see in this proposal.
I mean, I'll just butt in here. I think a lot of times what happens is, as leaders also, people sometimes are not okay with getting that feedback. So handling such leaders in the workplace also becomes very important for anyone.
Yeah. Yes, Abhinandan, you're right. But the thing is, you will never know unless you try.
Right.
And that's where courage comes in, because most organizational constructs are not such that, because of our own expectations of leadership, and now this is universal, this is not an Indian trait, we expect leaders to be right. Leadership, one of the problems of leadership, one of the problems that leadership works with is that there's a general assumption that a leader knows what he's talking about, he or she is talking about, and that a leader is right. So therefore, leaders very often don't create the space for this kind of interaction to happen. One of my most successful roles was as the head of employee relations, industrial relations in Hindustan Lever. I did that job for 4.5 years. And every meeting used to have a specific period of time where people would be invited to ask questions. And I would not close the meeting unless I got a particular number of questions. And this frame was set up early on. So every time a new member came on board, I used to make them uncomfortable, because I would say, unless you ask me a question, I'm not closing the meeting. And sometimes you could even one step further and say, look, if you don't have any questions, then what are you doing here? I mean,
so I think we'll make that a trend for all our meetings going forward.
Possibly.
It's a very important, important way of getting people to open up.
Yeah,
very useful way. Yeah.
Yeah, so we used to have the leadership team meetings every week, every Monday morning for about 45 minutes. And whenever a new person got promoted, I knew the rest of the team would tell him, "Ab teri bari lagne wali hai. Boss तुझसे सवाल करने वाला है, तुझसे सवाल कराने वाला है." And I would laugh and I would say, yeah, what questions? And once or twice they would say, no, it's the first meeting. So I said, so what? You've been in the company for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, whatever. You must have
Yeah.
some questions. And typically, what would seal it is they kept quiet for too long. I would say, look, one of us is not required in this meeting. If both of us are going to remain silent, then it doesn't help. So, but evoking that kind of questioning, it. But don't get me wrong. While I joke about it, while I laugh about it, it takes a lot of courage to stand up in front, or to metaphorically, you don't literally stand up, but in front of your boss and in front of 5 of your peers who have probably been doing their jobs longer than you, have to say, I don't think this is right. I think there is a problem here. And to be able to articulate it and take the feedback. I mean, yeah, maybe the proposal is right and you're wrong. But 9 times out of 10, I would argue that there is a perspective that someone has missed out. There'll be some value arising out of it. Even if nothing else, if the boss says, no, I don't want to listen to you, then at least you know a little bit more about your boss than you did earlier, which is a good thing. But with today's generation, I would also argue that a very dictatorial, hierarchical approach will not work.
Yeah.
I don't think people are built that way anymore. This was probably a hallmark of my generation as well, that we used to be a little more quiet. I don't think that happens anymore. I know that doesn't happen anymore by and large. So I think this element of courage, and I mean, I can tell you a couple of examples where how this courage translates into practice, how it reflects in practice. I was having a meeting with a bunch of union leaders from Calcutta, interestingly, and this was 10, 15 years back, and my boss walked into the meeting. My boss was a lady who's currently the CEO of Chanel Worldwide, Lena Nair. So she walked into the meeting and said hello, and courtesy kind of meeting. And somewhere along the way, they started talking. By then, these guys knew me. They had interacted a lot with me, and they asked her a question. And she said, no, why don't you ask Sameer before you ask me? It's not fair. He needs to answer it before I answer it. And these guys actually started laughing. They said, ma'am, we will not ask Sameer sir this question, because if we ask him, he'll answer it. And once he answers it, then we have a problem, because he will not change his mind. So it was, again, that's a bit of courage, isn't it? To be able to look at someone and say, no, I don't agree with you, and I'm not going to do this. So, do what you want now. It's not going to work. They knew that I was capable of doing stuff like that, so they were very careful. They would always ask 5 people around me, कि Sameer says, सवाल करें तो क्या जवाब देगा, and then decide what question to ask and what kind of an answer to expect. That's the third thing, therefore. So, you need knowledge, you need execution, and you need courage to kind of make it to thought leadership or action leadership in the corporate world. There are a couple of softer elements that I would like to highlight. Aside from these 3 major elements, there are a couple of softer elements I'd like to highlight. And these are, again, things that are useful for people in their 20s. Not so useful for people older than that if you've mastered it. The first thing you need to master is, what does success mean to me? And very often we carry this construct of success that our parents have instilled in us, or our teachers have, or our peer set has said, you must be a CEO. Really? Why must you be a CEO? Why can't you just do something that you enjoy doing? I mean, why can't you be a great cook? Why can't you be a great writer? Why must you be a great CEO? If that is a story you're carrying around in your head. But an even more interesting story that you can examine, question that you can examine, is, why can't I be both? And that, again, is something that our at least our primary and secondary educational system doesn't teach us. You have this notion of success that is one thing that you must become. You must be a great doctor. You must be a great engineer. You must be a great chartered accountant. You must be a great CEO. You must be a very good CHRO. Why can't you be both? Why can't you be more than one? Why can't you be a great CHRO and a good writer? Why can't you be a good chief marketing officer and a good cook? Unless you ask yourself these questions, you won't examine who has given you this definition of success, and then lead up to the question, what is your definition of success? Because that is what you're going to be measured against. I mean, if you are going to allow yourself to be measured by someone else's standards, you'll never be happy. You'll never be satisfied. You'll always be trying for something more, without knowing why you're doing it. And Unfortunately, when you reach there, you might find that it's not so exciting. It's not so interesting unless you really want it. So, may as well ask yourself now, what is it that I really want to do, and choose for that. The second thing I would mention is keep a sense of compassion. And I think this is something that is, I hope, is taught in some schools. I know it is not taught in a lot of schools. But a sense of sensitivity, a sense of compassion, a sense of ethics. Our problems are much bigger than, you know, gross national product and gross domestic product and per capita income. These are important things. There's no doubt about that. But especially for the country that we are in and for the context that we grew up in, um, when you see an old woman on the street asking for money, what's the first thought that comes across your mind? Is it let me get away from here, or is it let me see what I can do? Yeah, and I know sometimes the thought that flashes through their head is, given that there are a few 100 million people who are below the poverty line in India, how many can I help? To that, I have one answer to give you. Yeah? I'm currently speaking to you from Dubai. Dubai is a desert. It's in the middle of the desert. There are no natural resources in this country. Yeah? In this country, well, I mean, it's the United Arab Emirates. Just to give you a bit of history, there are 7 emirates. So, emirate is derived from the word emir. So, the emir is the ruler of the emirate. The 7 rulers got together and said, let's create a country. They did that in 1971 or so. There is one emirate which has oil, which is called Abu Dhabi. But Abu Dhabi does not share its oil wealth with any other emirate. There are some resources that are in common. There are some funds which are in common, but it's not in the sense of, let's say, US or in India, where oil in Assam or oil in Texas belongs to the entire country. It's not that way here. Dubai especially is the middle of nowhere. It's sand. From start to finish, it's sand and oil. But this is also one of the greenest cities in the world. It has greenery. It has golf courses, for example, that are on par with the best in the US. It has there are 3 lakes outside my house, all man-made. How did it start? How do these things happen here? It's very, very simple. A small group of people get together and decide to do something. That's it. It's as simple. So the trees outside my house were planted 15 years back. They have just started reaching some level of vegetation now. 15 years back, I mean, if you had spoken to someone and said that I'm going to create something that looks like a bit of a forest or even like a park in Dubai, they would have laughed at you. They said, yeah, there's a lot of sand here. There's no water. All the water has salt in it. So someone said, I'll create a desalination plant. Someone said, I'll create pipes. Someone said, I'll construct buildings. Someone said, I'll plant trees. And that's how it's not been a master plan for the city. It's just been 1 square kilometer at a time. I'm doing this here. So whenever anyone says, what is it that I can do as a single person, I don't buy it anymore. It's like, you can do a lot as a single person. You just need to start. Once you start, you'll find that the answers will flow, the resources will flow, the people will gather around you, the actions will happen. And the world will change around you one step at a time. It will not happen overnight, but if you don't make that move now, it won't happen. Sudeep spoke about my career. I've worked in, one of my most profound working experiences was in Japan. I spent 3 weeks there as part of a training program, but it was very immersive. I then spent 3 years in Switzerland, and then spent 2 years in Sri Lanka. This is about my 6th or 7th year in Dubai. All cultures have this one thing. All successful cultures, high performance cultures, have this one thing in common. They're like, the individual makes a difference. You just need to get out there and do something. Say that you want to do it. As long as it's not unethical, immoral, or illegal, you'll find that things start moving and you start creating a nucleus of energy around yourself. And that's how things get done in most countries. Are we there yet? No. I think as a country, as India, we're not there. But are we better than we were 30 years back? Definitely. That I would certainly say there's some notion, there's some element of pride I have there as well. But our problems are not insurmountable. they can be conquered. It can be done. Just need the will and the wherewithal to get there. And I think that's where our educational systems and our corporate systems have a big role to play. Big role to play in terms of moving things forward. Let me pause for a few minutes, Abhinandan. I've been talking a lot. I think.
Yeah, sure. So I think, I mean, what we have learned so far is, I think you've talked about having compassion, which is one of the key components of doing something, to start something. I think that is very important. And having that faith that, you know, one is not small. I think that's what you're trying to imbibe in the students. And I think for students as well, I think, you know, can I do it, or can, you know, a lot of fear factor is there in our minds. That might be a reason because of our culture. That might be a reason because of, you know, whether we are coming from a middle class or a lower middle class background. We can have these constraints at home that make us feel that way, or we might be, you know, groomed to think in a certain manner. But I think it's always on us to figure out how we can take that first step, and that, I think, connects back to the courage factor as well. Mr. Sudeep Bhattacharya has raised his hand. I will just request him to unmute and speak up and ask his question.
Sir, I was been listening to you in rapt attention.
बोलना मैंने
Oh, yeah. I had been listening to you with rapt attention, trying to understand exactly how things, you know. See, this one thing that I often, because I've been working with multiple industries, multiple organizations for so many years now. And one thing that I always try to understand, I have observed this very closely. That, see, the same society that is out of that organization, from there itself people come. See, if I have come here, I have come from a certain society. Now, look at a society in Bengal. Look at a society in West, in Mumbai, or the different societies, right? So people
Sure.
that the society has a certain trait, certain understanding. So how the character also, definitions, value points, your belief systems, your way of understanding the world, looking perspectives are different. How do you think we gel? Suppose I had been to Mumbai, Bangalore, and all throughout my life. Now I am in a place in Siliguri, it's a very small town. So I have seen something there and I'm doing something here. How do I gel? Suppose there is a situation like this. For anybody to gel into an organization, have the right characteristics in place to contribute meaningfully in a corporate world. So
That's a very good question, Sudeep. Thank you. I think it points to the fact that organizations create cultures for themselves. They create expectations, but and you're right. To some extent, these expectations are drawn from the environment. Every society constructs for itself a set of rules in terms of what is acceptable behavior and what is not at a meta level that always operates and that influences the organization. But at a more specific level, most organizations are very, very good at communicating what behavior is acceptable and what is not, both good and bad. The best organizations do it consciously. They're very conscious of what the messages they are sending out, and they make sure that those messages come across to you. Like, for example, I was saying about, membership in my team means that you have to raise your voice. It means that you have to ask questions. And I would very often tell people that, look, I am pushy. Don't expect me to be, nice and say that, when can you do this by? I'll come into a room, I'll say that this needs to be done by tomorrow morning, handle it. It's for you at the same time to get up and say, boss, this is a little difficult, or you've given me 5 things to do already, now you tell me which one you want me to do first. But that's how organizations communicate values. They communicate acceptable behavior. Equally much, the question that one of you, I think Abhinandanji was mentioning, that sometimes leaders don't encourage questioning. Well, that's also an organization telling you that when your boss says something, you should not question. It's not healthy, it's not good, but the organization does it for whatever reason, assuming it's not happening in an emergency. But that's how these communications happen in an organization. Now, it's very important also, therefore, to be aware what are my personal values in this situation. If I'm looking for a certain sense of equality, a certain sense of belonging, a certain sense of group identity, and if I'm not getting it, then maybe this is not the right place, and there's nothing wrong with that. uh, I think there are choices available. There are things that people choose to do, and I think partially also, for example, the push towards diversity and inclusion comes from this need to say that yeah, I'm unique, I'm different, and I want my different to be recognized and difference to be acknowledged and recognized. I don't want to be quiet. I don't want to behave like everyone else. That's fine. So starting from something as fundamental as gender or identity and so on, that's how people make those expectations known in organizations, and then how organizations react then tend to make it clear in terms of how these things are going to work in a larger organization and in a larger context. There are some levels which are, there are some meta changes, like you're saying, for example, if someone comes from Eastern India to Western India, yeah, some things are different. Language will be different, probably the levels of traffic will be different, although one would argue that Calcutta and Mumbai are largely similar, or Calcutta and Bangalore may be largely similar in terms of traffic, but there are some ways in which you have similarities and some ways in which you have dissimilarities. Food might be different. But fundamentally, some of our values, I think, as Indians don't change in terms of, for example, the desire to achieve, the desire to contribute. I think very instinctively there's often a desire thinking in terms of a larger group. Sometimes those groups are ill-defined, and we tend to have an intuitive definition of what group we belong to, rather than challenging it openly and understanding it openly. But I'd also say, therefore, build more on the similarities than on the differences. The more you focus on the similarities, the easier it is to move forward, and the easier it is for you to contribute as well and to make a difference, to be recognized and to belong. I'm not sure if that answers your question. It's a slightly long answer, but a very interesting question at any rate.
It goes long back. I'm talking to you about 1996, 97. I had asked the same question to Mr. A.L. Hassan. And that same question I'm asking you today, so many years ago, I asked him. So he had almost the similar answers that you are giving me today. So it falls in the same. Another small addition to this thing, very important aspect that I've seen most of these leaders. First, you hardly get leaders in corporate. You have managers at most. You hardly have leaders. Even if you have chanced across a few ones, you might have somebody might have stuck to you. So one thing that I have found it from employees' point of view, one is an employer's point of view. From the employee's point of view, in the organizations, one thing is very visible is that you need to be able to forgive a lot of your bosses to remain relevant in an organization. That is one of the criteria for somebody to sustain over a period of time that I have seen very closely. Is how well you are able to forgive. Do you think that's also a character trait that one should develop as they work into a organization? Means what is your take on this?
I will answer your question, but I'll make a couple of comments in advance of that. And I think this is where I was commenting on the fact, on the Indian notion of leadership, that a leader has to be perfect. We're not perfect. We're only human. You look at me closely enough, you'll find things about me that are difficult to work with. Several of my team members, because one of my strengths is that I allow people to question me, they've given me some very blistering feedback about myself at times, saying, "Boss, you don't listen. Some issues you are like, no, I'm going to do this way. I don't like it." Obviously, I mean, it's like I've worked for 30 years, you worked for 20 years. So from my perspective, it's like, Sudeep, I know the answer. I'm telling you, this is how you're going to do it. From your perspective, it's like, boss, 20 years counts for something. Don't just say that I don't know the answer, because I might have something of value. That's an ongoing negotiation. But I think, for example, if you look at a culture like Switzerland, it's a very egalitarian, equal-oriented kind of culture. So even people 30 years younger than you would address you by your first name. They would call me Sameer, they would call you Sudeep and say, "I wanted to ask you about this thing you were saying yesterday." And no one needs permission to speak over there. So that's a very outdated concept. They're like, "Yeah, I mean, I have a question. I'm asking you a question." Now, if you say that you're too busy to answer, well, we're not going to be working with you for very long. So that's one part of it. We're all human. I think all of us have our blind spots. All of us have our dark spots. Jung calls the shadow, or what the MBTI or what Johari window calls the blind spot. All of us have that. It's only a matter of being more aware of it and deciding, is it something you can live with, or in this context, is it something you can work with? So now coming to your question, Sudeep, is forgiveness important? Yes, it is, but probably not for the reason you think. Forgiveness is important because it allows me to move on, not because it allows you to move on. I'm not forgiving my boss so that he can feel good about it. I'm forgiving him so that I can move on from this situation. I once had this situation where I was I'm not going to give too much of details, obviously, to protect the privacy of the people concerned, but he was my most important stakeholder. I had an idea and a concept that was never tried in Indian industry before. And obviously, there was a lot of discomfort about trying it out. This particular stakeholder went a little more aggressive than the most, and kind of got a little personal about it and started attacking me personally, saying that you don't know what you're doing and blah blah blah, a whole lot of things. And I was like, no, I know what I'm doing, and this is how we're going to do it. He said, at the end of a very heated discussion, he said, you might lose your job if it doesn't work. I said, okay, I don't mind. I lose my job, I lose my job. It's not so much of a problem as far as I'm concerned. And it was genuinely not a problem for me then. Okay, if I lose my job here, I'll get a job somewhere else. It's not a big deal. Now, it was a long drawn out execution. It took about a year. About 18 months down the road, the results started coming in. The results were as I predicted. The plan worked. Unfortunately, what had happened was that a lot of these criticisms that he had leveled against me were in public. They were now proved to be unfounded. I got a little bit the high horse. So when someone asked me, will you work with him on this project? I said, no, I don't want to work with him. And he was like, okay. It was a little bit obsessive. And I was like, no, I don't think he respects me. So I don't want to work with him. Then I realized that what I was doing was actually, I was being stuck in something that had happened 18 months back. I had not moved on from there. The rest of the world had moved on. The project had worked. And actually, at a time when I should have probably been a little more generous and said, okay, I made a mistake. People make mistakes. Someone else has made a mistake. Can you move on from there? I went in the opposite direction. It took some time to repair the relationship and to keep things moving after that, but it happened. So the forgiveness is not for the sake of the other person. It's not for the sake of my boss. The forgiveness is for my own sake. I need to move on, therefore I move on. And once I figured that out, I was not so worried about what he was doing or what he was thinking anymore after that. I was like, okay, so you thought I was no good. That's fine. You thought I was no good. I've already proved that I'm good. No? Now, what do I need to worry about? If anything, he should be a little embarrassed the next time he sees me face to face. I don't really have a problem. So you're right. Forgiveness is important as a human quality, but it's for your benefit. It's for the individual's benefit. It's not for anyone else's benefit. Required, yes. And I think that does answer your question. This time I have no doubt. This question I have no doubt. I've answered it.
Yeah, I want to know your perspective about it, because since you have been handling so many people of different age groups, so because maybe many people might be senior to you, junior to you, but all of them are, so this is a motley of emotions, motley of people of different cultures. And these days, this is becoming very difficult, because I recently, this Sameer Nagarajan in Microsoft, he had, all the blacks. He has specially designed a reward arena for those black, employees. So it came in a LinkedIn post. I somehow felt that despite being a manager of a leader of that repute, he's still in that mold of having a black, and because in America, it is still very much blacks and whites and all those stuff. So he was writing that comment. So I just commented on that. So I got a huge pushback on so many. I just said, why is it that you are trying to, recognize black and all? Just somebody is doing well, doing well. It might be of any caste, religion, creed. Why do you make a distinction? He's in an organization, that's it. So why does it make sense? Then a lot of people wrote back on that particular post saying me that you don't know the reality of US. This sort of activities needs to be done. So I just wanted to, because these are all the traits which actually creates an organizational, culture and whatever, practice and whatever. So this sort of dichotomies are also visible to a great extent, which I see as I go through. So I felt this question, that the reason I asked you is because many type of people come across, and how do you actually navigate? How do you ensure that keeping everything intact, productivity is there, and the growth is there. So this becomes a huge thing. Thank you so much for your answer, sir. It gives me a very clear perspective also. Like that same word that I used, right? Framework, and you corrected it. What was it? Heuristics or something?
Heuristic. Yeah. I use the word heuristic. Yeah. No, it's this point that you've raised is important. I think it's one thing to say that I recognize you as an employee, but the fact is that we bring multiple identities to work. And very often, the classical organizational concept recognizes some identities but not others. I mean, if you count the number of identities, typically most of us have 10 or 15 identities at any given moment.
True.
If you ask me, for example, I'll say I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I'm a subordinate, I'm a boss, I'm a Tamilian, I'm also from UP, I speak Hindi very well, I've traveled the world, and these are all parts of my identity. Which one are you going to recognize? And which one is it, the one that is closest to me? So, what you are describing, the Satya Nadella situation, is, the African American identity is very closely held in the US. It's a very sensitive identity
Yes.
because of the historical associations and injustices that the community has suffered. There is a realization that equity includes actions that favor. To a certain extent, Sudeep, this is also true of gender, is it not? So when we say that we are pushing for women in management or women in leadership, it's the same thing we're doing. You could also argue, why not just recognize someone for good performance? Why do you want to say that being a woman, she has done this? So that's where the difference lies. And I think that is what may have provoked a reaction. But of course, social media is also an unforgiving place that way, because we don't sit with people face to face, we think we can be very insulting. We can say whatever comes into your head.
Recently also I got some messages. Many people have been very positive about this also. Many people have been extremely, because my point was very simple. I was trying to understand, when you are trying to build you have an organization. A person is a person. Suppose, see, they have so much of, there is almost a mandate, very oblique and a very mandate that there should be blacks in the board of directors. And ultimately, there was a research, the SBR, Harvard Business School has done a research that found that they have good people there, all right, because they have to maintain that mandate of some percentage of blacks to be there. But in none of the meetings and none of the corporate decisions they were taken apart. They have never been given any sort of value. They have been there by name. So where does it go from here? It actually is basically maybe in the short term. So because all these things are also part of how a person in an organization, his character, his nature, his everything. This also, I think, to a great extent influences. I don't know means how you would take it actually, but I have a feeling that way.
Well, one part of it, Sudeep, is what qualities you bring to the table. But the other part of it is that as an organization, I can make it impossible for you to contribute.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you've been in meetings where you've tried to contribute and somehow no one listens to you. It's not actually somehow no one listens to you. There's a decision in the organization that we brought him in here because we were forced to bring him in here. Now, let him sit there. Let him or her or whatever. I think that's what happens. So, if you're not careful, diversity can become a tick box. I had to hire 5 women. I've hired 5 women. 50% of my batch ought to be women. I've hired 50% of my batch as women. Or, 10% of my people must be from this part of the country. Done. That's fine. That's a start. But that's not the end of it. Then the next thing, you need to create the space for people to collaborate and contribute. I mean, it's a sensitive topic, but in academic institutions, you often see this, right? The first generation learner, where the father and mother are school leavers and the child is coming into a graduate course for the first time. So there are very few role models at home. There are very few people you can model and emulate if you're in a
Right.
hostel. Compare that with theoretically my kids who spent half their lifetime studying outside India, been in boarding schools, been in the best boarding schools, the best educational institutions. Put these two together and think of what the interaction would be like. Unless there's a framework that governs it and makes it possible for it to happen, there's going to be a disaster. One way or the other, there's going to be a disaster. And that's what this Harvard study points at, saying that you put people onto the board, but you don't give them the space or the abilities to contribute and perform. So what's going to happen? At the end of it, you'll say that diversity doesn't work. Actually, diversity works. Hey, you have a problem. The problem is with you. It's not with diversity as a concept. And I don't mean you personally, but I'm saying the organization, obviously, whatever it is.
Point
So
well.
so more complicated than that, more complex than that. And I think we have to kind of drive towards that kind of situation. I mean, one of Lena used to put it very evocatively. My boss, whom I was saying is now the CEO of Chanel, she used to say that diversity is being called to attend the party. Inclusion is when someone walks up to you and says, "Can I dance with you?" And I think that explains it beautifully. You can be called to a party and told to sit at a corner. Here's your food, here's your drink. Now do what you want. But the rest
True.
of us are having a good time here. But so when you get invited to the dance is when you feel included. That
Well, if
is the meaningful kind of.
sir, your
Yes, Sana, do you have a question?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Sana.
Sir, I want to ask a question. Like earlier, you said that what success mean to you, and then you said that you can be a chef and be a CEO. Then I was like, that part is literally amazing for me. Like, how can this be? Like, I just curious about this topic.
Okay.
Sir, can you explain that topic, please, in
Yes,
brief?
I'm just trying to explain it with reference to let's take my own situation. Yeah.
Thank you so
Until
much, sir.
until I was about 45 years old, so about 10 years, so a little late in life in my case. The 10, 12 years back, I was a very, very corporate man. My entire notion of success itself revolved around getting the next promotion, getting the next increment. I must move to a bigger country. I must have a bigger role. I must have a bigger this and that. Sometime around 10, 12 years back, as I said, I was having this reflective conversation one day with one of my mentors, and he said, "What are you going to be remembered for?" So I was like, "What do you mean? I've been the head of employee relations and the CHRO." He said, "No, you don't think people will remember you for that?" He says, "You tell me who was the CHRO of your company 30 years back." I don't remember. I don't even know. Forget about it. I don't remember. So he said, "So what is it really you want to be remembered for? No, not what you are going to be, but what do you want to be remembered for?" And it was not an easy process. It triggered from there and some very uncomfortable, some very tough questions. So I didn't lose my corporate career kind of thing, but there are a lot of other capabilities I built up after that. So I'm a coach. I'm a certified coach from ICF. I realized that, let's put it this way. The starting point was I realized that one of the things I'm very fond of, or the spaces that I'm very fond of, is in facilitating individual change and organizational change. So from the individual change side, I started practicing my coaching skills, and I became a certified coach from ICF. I started working with. I give a lot of my time for free to students and others who might need it, and developing them. So that's on the individual transformation space. On the organizational transformation space, Stanford University in the US has an initiative called SEED. Now, SEED works with SMEs, small and medium enterprises in India and Africa. And you can impanel as a consultant with SEED, and the work we do is free. But we work typically with organizations, for example, in India, which have a turnover of less than 50 crores per annum. 50 to 70 crores per annum is the typical mark, although some of them are much bigger than that. But And these are all companies that are trying very hard to become big. They do a lot in terms of hiring, in terms of marketing, in terms of business. We do that work for free. And I built up that capability. Then some, this whole, again, who says you can't do it? So when I started getting these three things in place, I was like, what else would you like to do? And then I said, okay, I like sketching. So I said, okay, sketch, I paint. I got a book published last year. I write fiction, which is also a little unusual because most people associate corporate careers, it's like, what's the name of your book? And I'm like, it's so and so. And they're like, oh, I thought you'd written something on leadership. I said, no, I don't write on leadership. Whatever writing I do on leadership is on LinkedIn. It's not anywhere else. But that again was triggered by a question from a particular friend, a process facilitator, who said, who made this rule? When I said that, I don't want to, I don't think I have the time for sketching or writing. And he broke that down. He said, he broke the argument down. He said, no, you actually have time. You don't want to do it. So I was like, yeah, but whoever heard of CHROs and senior corporate leaders writing fiction? He looks at me and says, who made this rule? Who put this rule into your head that you can't do both? And I was like, actually, I put it in my own head. You have time to do what you want. If you have the inclination to do what you want, yeah, it's tough. You can look forward to working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, or 6.5 days a week. If you want to do, my days are 12 hours a day, 6.5 days a week. But I love every minute of it. That's how I do it, Sana.
I think I'll just add here that, Sana, I think, we hear about following our passion, but sometimes it's not just about passion, it's about going beyond, just passion, because at the end of the day, you have to do your work, ensure that you feed your family and all of that. However, at the same time, what Sir is trying to say is, I think he mentioned during his discussion earlier that it's important for us not to put ourselves in a mold. Often we do that. Often we let other people also do that for us. So I think it's important to keep having this curiosity, having this questioning mind that, is this all that there is, or can I do more than this, or can I do better than this? So, and then I think automatically other pathways and other options come out, whether you want to be a cook and a CEO or you want to be something else. I think that will come up if you keep asking yourself this question at various stages of your life.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah,
That's really helpful.
I just like to add, Sana, I think Abhinandanji makes a good point there. There are obligations that all of us have. So if you are, the sole individual responsible for the upkeep of a family, there are things you have to do. And so I'm not for a moment saying that you should dump all your personal obligations and start chasing off some dream. But there's a place where everything can happen. And it's within your grasp. That judgment you can make, that maturity you have. All of us have at all times, so it will work.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Twinkle, do you have a question?
Somebody has in the chat. Somebody has asked a question. Also,
I can see that Twinkle has raised her hand. If she has a question, we will go there. Otherwise, we'll go to the chat.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. There's some echo at your end.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, it is audible.
Yeah, we can hear you. Please speak.
Sir, I had a question. Like, in an organization, there is a flow of accountability of work rather than authority, which makes it a bit rigid. So the organization should be flexibility so that it can enhance the creativity of an employee.
Okay. So what's the question? Can you just kind of repeat that to me? I understood the point about accountability and authority, and therefore, what's the question you're asking?
So actually, it's make the organization rigid. Like, again, we have to follow the authority chart. Like, we have to go to the top level. That leads to like rigid. There is no flexibility or creativity for the employees.
Are you asking how an organization can bring more flexibility? Is that your question?
Sir. Yes, sir. That is my question.
Okay. Yeah, so I think a good point, Twinkle. I think in most organizations, the authority is basically who is responsible for a decision that's going to cost money. Yeah? Because all decisions cost money. At the end of the day, there is either a real cost or an opportunity cost. And therefore, authority only means that, for example, there are some decisions that I need to take because the assumption that the organization makes is that Sameer knows the risks involved, and therefore, if Sameer decides, it's likely to be a good decision, and Sameer can also take accountability for it. So, in a sense, that's also protecting you at the start of your career, because if you were to experiment and take the wrong decision, it would, and if the accountability was with you alone, then that would be a little more, career limited in that sense. Authority, so that's one part of authority. Whose signature is it? Whose decision is it? And who's accountable for it? There's another part of authority, which is, do you have the independence to, as I said, the independence, the creativity, the knowledge, the execution, and the courage to say what you want? And to say that I have a plan, Sameer, and I think this is better than plan, or I think this plan will work, whether it's better or not, and say that these are the benefits that I see from this plan. I think that authority all of us have. And all of us have had it we have it at every stage in our career. We don't use it very often or until a late stage. And my advice is start using it at an early stage. You can always say that I have an idea, I want to talk about this. That authority you always have. The decision might still be mine. That's okay. So whether for better or for worse, the accountability rests with me. Remember equally much that if I don't listen to your suggestion and if I don't implement it and turns out later that that's a good idea, I also have to explain why I rejected it. No? So that response, the accountability even in that case is mine. So it's in my own interest to listen. It's in my own interest to listen and debate with you as to what we should do. But unless you open that discussion, I wouldn't know. I can facilitate it to the point of saying, okay, Twinkle, is there anything you want to tell me? Is there a suggestion you have? How do you feel about this? But if you still don't open up and say, no, boss has decided, boss is okay, that's the authority that you're not using in that situation. Does that help?
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir, it can.
Right. So Twinkle, if you can lower your hand now. That I think we have answered your question. And we just have, we have already crossed the 1 hour mark, and I just go to the chat section where we have 4 questions. We will take these 4 questions and then we will probably close the meeting, and because we have to maintain the time. So first question from Shibajit Goala. You have asked, how does having a strong character help in dealing with failures? So I believe this was discussed at the very beginning of the conversation, but still, since you have a question, I will request Mr. Nagarajan to just, probably list a few pointers again.
Yeah, and in keeping with this is the flip side. Part of it is the flip side of the earlier question. Whether you have your own definition of success, also be clear what failure means to you and who is deciding that you have failed. You might have done something wrong. You might have made a mistake. Is that a failure? I mean, are you going to stop with that? A failure means you've lost. You stopped. I don't think of... there are failures, but very, very few. Very few things are actually disasters. I mean, what we think of at a disaster at 6 p.m., typically, if you have a good meal and you sleep on it for a while, you'll find a solution to it the next morning. It's not so heavy. That has been one of my insights. Early in my career, I made what I thought was severely damaging mistakes. I realized that it didn't really matter so much. It didn't cost very much money. Yeah, there might have been. I think there was more of a loss of faith to myself when I realized that I've made a mistake and I'm not as good as I think I am. There's something about for me to deal with personally. But it was not really a failure. So one, I would just quickly say, be clear in your mind what really is a failure. To me, a failure would be if I did something unethical, if I did something immoral, if I looked the other way when something is going seriously wrong and I didn't act on it and I didn't encourage someone else to act on it, that would be a failure. Not simply that I did something and it didn't work. How does having a strong character, on the other hand, help you deal with it? Do you learn? I mean, the whole question is when something has not worked the way you want it to work, what have you learned from it? To me, that makes the difference between failure and success as far as I'm concerned. If you've done something wrong and you've learned what not to do next time, it's not a failure anymore. It's just a learning experience. You move on from there. And that Learning comes from strength of character. It comes from the ability to say that I am not a bad person. I'm not a stupid person. I may have done something stupid, but I am not stupid. And therefore, I can learn from what happened over here. I can look at this, I can figure this out, and I can make sure this doesn't happen the next time. And that comes from character. That comes from courage. That comes from the ability to reflect. That comes from the ability to listen to what others are telling you. It comes from sensitivity. All that is part of character. And that's what helps you deal with failure, frankly.
Right. So
Thank you,
I
sir.
think there's a nice phrase which goes by, success is not final and failure is not fatal. So I think that's what you need to keep in mind, and I think
Okay. Yeah.
you can move on from there as long as you have learned. That's what the point was.
Yes.
Sushant, you have asked about how do you balance staying true to your principles while being adaptable in different social or professional environments. How do you balance staying true to your principles?
Hi. I could do another couple of hours on this, but I'll try and keep it brief. My question to you, Sushant, is what are your values? What will you not take a compromise on? I mean, to me, it's very clear. If there's anything that happens that makes me compromise on my values, I will get up and walk out. It's as simple as that. I still remember in my first interview with Hindustan Lever, so I'm talking about 1995, and or even before that, 1988, I think. And the interview board asked me. They said, under what circumstances would you quit Hindustan Lever? And I said, if you asked me to do something unethical. So they're like, what? I said, well, I was a bit naive then, but I said, well, if you ask me to pay a bribe, I won't. I'll quit. And they were really taken back, but they said, no, well, in this company, we don't pay bribes anyway. And that's the truth, by the way. So I said, okay, so you can probably stay for a long time. I did leave Hindustan Lever, but it was not for an ethical reason. To me, it's very simple. I know what my values are. When those lines are crossed, I don't take it anymore. As long as those lines are not crossed, I can be flexible. So, for example, I'm a champion of diversity in most organizations I've been in. So if I hear someone making a crude comment about women or about any minority, you can understand, being in an industrial relations role, I've also been personally been exposed to some of the injustices of the caste system in rural India. I know what it is like. So when I see some of those lines, and in the companies I've worked in, I've never allowed it to happen. When I see something like that happening, I just put my foot down and say, no, won't work. Not on my watch. And I think it's simply a matter of standing up for what being true to what you stand for. And if you are true to what you stand for, it'll answer your question. You can make changes in some situations where your values are not being compromised. Where your values are being compromised, you'll figure it out. And you'll figure out a way of making it happen. It's as simple as that.
Right. So you probably do not balance.
Core values. What are my core values?
Probably do not values. You probably do not balance in these kind of situations. It either is according to your principles or it's not, and then you either it's the highway or that you have to take.
Abhinandan, but just one point I'd like to make there is, it is true that it's either my way or the highway, but what other thing you realize about values is that they're actually very few. Most people have 2, 3, 4 core values. It's not a large number, and therefore the chances of a value getting trampled on are low.
Very rare, very rare.
Actually say that, it is something that I can live with and work with.
Mishika is asking, how can individuals develop and strengthen their character over time?
Practice. You won't get it right the first time all the time. There's no alternative to practice. Unless you remind yourself to be courageous, you won't be courageous every time. Unless you remind yourself to be honest, you won't be honest every time. Unless you critically evaluate yourself and say, how good was I at executing on this piece, you won't improve. So reflect, seek feedback, look at yourself the way others see you. Be a little hard on yourself, but not too hard. Don't put yourself down. But ask for feedback. Ask 5 people how you did, how was their project, did they like it? Ask them what they didn't like. Everyone will tell you what they like. Ask them, what didn't you like about what I did? How could I have done it better? All those will give you insight on your character. And know that you're on a journey like everyone else. You're not. It's not that none of us are born perfect. None of us are, have come into this place 100 out of 100 from day one. Doesn't happen. We all get better. We're all on a journey, so just keep working at it. You're on mute, Abhinandan. Sorry.
I think he has he might have just so
No,
there
I
is
think
a
I'm back now.
yes.
Yes.
I am back, but however, I'm unable to see the past comments. Actually, I think I had to rejoin in between. So if someone can, Mr. Bhattacharya, if you can read the next question, then we can ask that question. Mr. Bhattacharya, if you can read out from the chat the next question that was there, I can't see it.
Well, I can actually see it. It says, what advice would you give to Sneha Sheel has asked, what advice would you give to young professionals who are at the beginning of their career regarding the importance of character? In a sense, I've answered this question, Sneha, but character defines you. Character is who you are. You'll be remembered for your character. People will appreciate you for your sense of humor, your optimism, your general sense of joviality. But unless there is a base which is in your character, they won't. Neither will they remember you, nor will they feel good about you. It's the starting point for everything. So brief answer, but I don't want to make it too complicated. But don't lose sight of it. It's where everything starts.
But I think with that we have come to the end of the questions for this particular.
There's
session.
one more question. There's one more
Okay.
question. I think
Okay.
Sulabna Das has asked how to increase my confidence in an organization. Simple answer, Sulabna. Do things. Do things. Confidence increases from doing. It doesn't increase from thinking. It doesn't increase from being by themselves. Of course, you have to be. You have to be in the workplace, and you have to think before doing anything. But unless you do stuff, unless we see stuff in action, unless we see output, we won't be able to tell you anything, and you will not have the confidence to go on. So, this whole thing of paralysis of should I do it, should I not do it, will Sameer like it, will Abhinandan feel good about it? You won't know until you try it. So just try it, do it. What is the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that I won't like it, and I'll tell you that I don't like it. So what? Learn from it and move on. But doing is important. In most organizational contexts, doing is important. If you don't do stuff, then you're not adding value at all.
I think action. One point is important here. How action defines somebody. It's not words. That's very important, especially for students who are listening. What Sir is trying to put out is that how your actions defines you, and actions in the right code, the code that you have created for yourself, and how you are actually translating it into action. That's very, very important. That seems to be another question from some Chandra, I think. So just now we come. I found it to be a little different. I don't know whether it is. Last question, Chandra Sinha.
Yes. For better self-growth, would you suggest staying in the same organization for years or keep switching? Which one would be more beneficial for an individual at the end?
So this will be the last question. I think that's a core problem you might have faced all throughout your life.
Reminds me of this Buddhist story, Tibetan Buddhism. There's a story of a young man who decided to prove that he went to a philosopher and he wanted to prove to the philosopher that you are wrong. So he held a bird in his hand and he held it like this and he said, tell me if the bird is alive or it's dead. The idea was that if the philosopher says the bird is dead, he'll release the bird and it'll fly away. And if he says the bird is alive, he'll squeeze his hand and show him a dead bird. So the philosopher answered, like all good philosophers said, the answer, my son, is in your hands. That would be a similar answer I'm thinking of here. I've seen successes on both sides. I've seen people who spent an entire lifetime with one company and been very successful. And I've also seen people who've changed jobs frequently. To be honest, I have changed jobs, so I can't I can't claim to have knowledge about what it feels like to stay in one company for a long time. Although however, I spent 19 years with Unilever, HUL and Unilever internationally. So if that counts for long, that's a fairly long stint. What does beneficial mean to you? I think let's be clear about that. I think from a purely financial point of view, HBR research shows that if you change jobs, you tend to earn more over the lifespan of a career, over 30 years, 30, 35 years, not necessarily in a short time frame. And then, of course, that assumes that HR managers don't do anything. HR managers are also savvy. I'd like to believe fairly savvy and intelligent people. So we also keep trying to prove HBR research wrong once in a way. So if money is what you're indexing on, there's HBR research to go by. But if you're indexing on learning, if you're indexing on social contribution, if you're indexing on stability for a family, stability does not come with changing jobs frequently. It's the opposite, in fact. Educational facilities might be better in some places and not so good in other places. So ultimately boils down to, what do you want? What is your definition of beneficial? And figure it out on that. There's some way or the other that there is. Chandra says stability for a family. Be in one place. Doesn't matter. Then you want to be in one physical location. It doesn't matter how many jobs you change. You can remain in Mumbai and change jobs as much as you want, as long as you are in Mumbai. If that's your index, that's fine. I think I've answered your question there, Chandra.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have the last question in particular was something different, and thanks to Mr. Nagarajan for making it very simple for the students. I think that is what is important. When we hear simple things from someone who has so much experience, it makes a lot of sense for the students as well, and for all of us here. So thank you so much on that. And there are two things that I really connected with from the conversation that we have had today. At the beginning, you said something which I have tried to say it multiple times and tried to follow it multiple times as well, which is, let's just do our 5% more and 5% better than what others are doing. That is all that counts, I believe. And apart from that, I think whenever you're thinking about giving a suggestion or thinking about taking a courageous step, asking the question, what's the worst that can happen? I think that is also very crucial. I think these two things are my biggest takeaways, because I try to follow that, and I think that is something for the students as well to keep in mind. With that, I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for today's session, all the way from Dubai. I'm sure it's early morning there, so thank you so much for spending time with us, with our students. And we would love to have you over. If you're here in India, we would love to have you over for a face-to-face interaction with our students and with our management as well. And with that, Mr. Sudhir Bhattacharya, I will request you to end the session today with a vote of thanks.
It's very difficult to end this sort of sessions, honestly. I must say, because as I listened to you, as I have been very patiently listening to you, there are so many insights, as a matter of fact. It's not only for the students. I don't know, many of the students may not be able to, understand the depths of many of the things that you have shared. But at the same time, the way you have actually broken into some micro level understanding for them to digest, I think it is wonderful. I must say it is wonderful. On behalf of the management of IIS School of Management, I thank you, sir, for your time. The way you have been participative has been phenomenal. We have been talking to many thought leaders, but very few occasions does it so happen that it is a 1 hour show and it went on about 1.5 hours. And there are still so many questions left. I'm sure many people are wanting to question you. But then every good thing has to end somewhere. So we had to end it. Very reluctantly we are ending it. Thankful my chairman sir was also there. In fact, he was listening. I saw him leaving the conversation in between. So I have had a discussion with him also about you, that you are coming to Kolkata. I would like to, rather, IIS School of Management would like to have a lot of interactions with you going forward in multiple.
Sure.
So, and also, I also thank my entire colleagues who have made this particular interaction very successful. There have been participations from multiple colleges, sir. Yeah, perhaps it is not visible to you, but the multiple colleges across Shiliguri, they have listened to you today. So this
That's
is,
wonderful.
I thank them also for their time that they have given to us, and to you in particular, sir, for your time and everything. Thank you so much. And with a lot of expectations of more to come, sir, I would like to end it here.
Thank you. I'd like
Thank
to
you.
thank all those who have taken the time to attend this call. Thank you for your interactions and your contribution to my learning as well. Thank you, Sudip, for initially getting in touch and organizing this. And a very special thank you to you, Abhinandan, for, I think, your moderation and keeping the flow going. Thank you all. It's been great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have yes.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Bye.